Okay, I have that it's time, John. Are you ready?
I am ready, and
All right.
welcome everybody. We've got about, well, I see 44 right now, so 45, so we're still climbing. We'll keep this code up here for just a minute. I'm John Vale, and you are here in a breakout session dedicated to the MTSS implementation at the secondary level. I'm a professional development specialist for Michigan's MTSS Technical Assistance Center, and I am indeed very pleased and privileged to share this presentation with Dr. Travis Thompson. He's principal of one of the 4 secondary schools that were part of a model demonstration grant that was sponsored by OSEP, the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And it was designed to say, hey, we're struggling with some kids that can't read very well at secondary level. What do we do? Let's try some things out. And so we did that. And you're going to hear a great story from Travis, both in terms of what worked, what didn't, and all. And so we'll get started with that in just a minute. As one of the co-authors of the grant and an instructional coach for Travis's school during that 4 or 5 year period that we worked together, I was really fortunate to work as part of a team. So I'm going to move our slideshow along now. So just make sure if you need your sketch code for today, it's 3FJBB. And now we will move on. As I mentioned, I'm part of a team. I was part of a team that was led by Dr. Anita Archer and Dr. Kim St. Martin. And you see a few others there. There were many others that were involved in this process, but we were guided by those individuals in what turned out to be a very rewarding experience. This is Travis's team, and I tell you, what a great, rewarding endeavor it was to be working with them and to see what was possible and their openness to doing things. And so, Travis, I'm going to just kick this to you to tell us a little bit more about your team.
All right, thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. Like John said, my name is Travis Thompson. I'm the principal at Portage North Middle School. Our team that you see on the screen has been here since the start of the grant. Amanda Fisher is our school site, Katie Denoyer running our MTSS programming, Kate Smith, one of our special ed teachers and lead interventionist, and Joanna Toth is our ELA teacher and one of our lead interventionists as well. And that team continues to still be here at North Middle School in some capacity, and that has been part of our success. So, John, I'll throw it back to you, and we'll get going.
Great. I know we'll hear a little bit more about these individuals as we go on. I think, Travis, I speak for both of us when I say that we believe in the value of, but also appreciate the level of commitment necessary to successfully implement MTSS framework at the secondary level. Although you see multiple outcomes, so Travis and I said, oh, what do we want people to get out of this? And so we sat down and we came up with these 5 items. And then I thought, wow, it took us 5 years to get to this under level. 75 minutes may not do us justice, but could you please in the chat, as you look through those 5, identify one that you would really like to make sure we focus on today, since 75 minutes isn't going to be enough for all of this. We'll try to gear towards the wishes of our audience here. So take just a minute, put it in the chat. Which one of those is really a top priority for you to get something out of today? Seeing lots of 3s and 4s. Oh, yeah, this is working, huh? 5s, 4, 3. Super. Well, we will do. Oh, thank you. Yeah, they're coming. Hey, Jason, nice to see you here. Lots of 3s and 4s. So good. We will make our way through that. So 3 is describing the integration of a tier 1 instructional program with partnering intervention sequence. And we'll talk about the importance of those things being aligned and intermeshed. And then number 4, process of journey, and Travis is going to have a good portion of that as we get to the second half of this day. So great, thanks for doing that. And here's our agenda. Travis is going to kick us off you defining, making sure we have a common kind of conception of what MTSS framework at the secondary level is about. I'm going to come on and talk a little bit about the developing skilled readers and writers. Not a lot there, but just make sure we have a common basic understanding. And then I'm going to continue on talking about the Gen Ed interventionists working together and what it looked like in our setting. And then Travis really is going to spend the bulk of the time talking about successes and lessons learned. If you have questions at any time throughout today, please feel free to put those in the chat. Matter of fact, we're going to invite questions at various points. The chat will be our way of communicating, and you guys are doing a fabulous job so far in that respect. So thank you very much. Laura, anything else? First, I want to just give a huge appreciation to Laura McQuarrie for being our moderator today and helping us out with just getting organized. And she'll be monitoring the chat for things and making sure we don't miss anything. But do you have anything to add to us, to this for us, Laura?
Just a warm welcome to everyone and an appreciation for your taking time out to engage in professional learning over the next 2 days, and specifically around secondary MTSS. So we are very glad you're here, and we're looking forward to hearing all about the pilot from Dr. Thompson and John. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Okay, Travis, I think you are up.
All right. Yes, I am, sir. All right. John, if you want to go to the next one, we can go there. So I guess asking folks around the state what MTSS means will certainly get you varied answers based on what part of the state you're in, what district you're in, your own personal interpretation of what MTSS is, often having disagreements about what the difference between Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 are. So we're going to kick off with just what the MDE, what their philosophy is, and what their definition is. And really, they describe it as a comprehensive framework comprised of a collection of research-based strategies that meet individual needs. MDE has some intentionality around this and how they connect all aspects of the whole child. And when you're talking about MTSS, it's not just an academic or a behavioral intervention, but it's really a comprehensive framework for meeting the needs of individual students.
Hey, Travis, I'm seeing in this is that for some people, they're seeing a very small version of the PowerPoint. So I'm going to stop sharing and then reshare.
Okay.
Now I have to figure out what happened to my cursor. There it is. Okay, hopefully that did it. And now I need to go back. Okay, I'm getting some appreciations there, so.
All right. If you want to slide to the next slide, we're ready to go.
Yeah, unfortunately, when we do this, my cursor goes blind, and I'm trying to figure out where it is so we can get it back. Aha, got it.
All right, perfect. All right, MTSS Framework components will work together effectively and achieve intended outcomes where practices are employed by the school to meet the needs of their students. This really isn't a flavor of the month practice. We all have seen those trends come and go, but really this framework is based around research and it's based around practices that are proven effective. And once those practices are identified, the school has to ensure that there is enough capacity within the staff to implement those clearly defined practices. And I think that's one of the things that you'll hear when we get into the story of North Middle School is just how we've sustained that training and support and coaching for our team. And one of the big lessons that we learned are the adaptations around those practices just to ensure that we are constantly moving in the right direction. Employing research-based practices and not intensifying or really looking at what the needs of your students are is a big mistake. All right, John, you can move on.
I did.
Yep. All right. So one of the things, the MTSS framework across the state has really blossomed over the last 3 or 4 years, partly due to a new statewide strategic plan that allowed MDE to recruit a diverse array of perspectives from around the state to create MTSS practice profiles. And practice profiles are tools that are used to ensure that practices are defined so they can be taught, learned, used, and measured by school personnel. So out of this team of diverse perspectives around the state came the essential components that you see listed on the screen there. So as we get into the story of North Middle School, you'll start to see these components take shape and evolve over time. We're also going to share what we learned along the way, what we threw away, and how we adapt to our student needs and our building needs, teacher capacity, and our overall MTSS development at the middle school level. This slide really highlights some of the aspects of impactful secondary MTSS components. I'm sure a lot of you are here for the same reason that we started this process, really trying to get at what effective strategies are for secondary students. At the elementary level, there's a ton of research around reading and what programs are effective, and there wasn't a ton at the middle school or high school level. So what we're talking about here is what we have found effective for our student population, and that could be different for you as well. Just looking back at this list, you know, 2 of the most important components listed on here coming off of COVID is going to be that social emotional support and readiness to learn for our students, and the explicit or direct instruction. We have found that explicit and direct instruction has been one of the most impactful strategies that our teachers have employed throughout this process. All right, this diagram shouldn't be new to anyone, but I think one of the important things to look at this is that MTSS encompasses all students, right? We often think about intervention programs at the tier 2 or tier 3 level and how we're measuring those, how we're delivering those interventions. But really, when you're looking at MTSS, it needs to be 100% of your students. And what we're going to be talking about today are those tier 1 instructional strategies coupled with our tier 2, tier 3 intervention strategies, and how those really intermesh and work well with one another. So as we get through this first part, reflect on your building and your leadership team. Do you believe that your team, your district, has a common understanding of what MTSS is? And is it really just a tier 2, tier 3 process, or are you really getting at all students?
Yeah, thanks, Ann, for opening up. And she said, need to get more explicit with the tier 1 folks. We found that too, that the assumption that they have certain skills or have been introduced to certain skills was wrong, right? So that was very important.
And I will add to that, John, that one of the things that we needed to do, and I don't know if we explicitly addressed this in the presentation, but really getting our staff to understand that there was a need for all students. You know, like Hillary just commented, it's not a place, or Ann, it's not a place where students go, right? It's a philosophy, it's an approach, it's a framework for how you meet the needs of all your kids. And even our highest achieving kids have benefited from what we are doing at the tier 1 level in our building.
Yeah, Travis, I don't know if you're going to mention this later, but one of the motivating factors was you were cited because of discrepancies between your top 30 and lower 30.
Yeah, we were, I want to say probably 7 years ago, identified as a focus school because of that achievement gap between our top and bottom 30.
And you'll talk maybe a little bit later about how that got resolved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. Cool. All right. All right, I'm going to take over here and just give a little background about developing skilled readers and writers, just because educators do phenomenal things every day. But our state, national, and most districts' data would suggest that skilled readers and writers at the secondary level is not one of those things we have totally figured out yet, and we continue to struggle. So we're going to talk about at the secondary level that communication of ideas and learning involve the reciprocal skills of reading and writing. It's hard to talk about one without the other. We've found that providing secondary teachers with a basic understanding of these skills and their components is needed and very helpful. So we start with the simple views, and by now many people have seen these already. These frameworks are simple in that they indicate that competency is the product of fluent and automatic foundational skills and the use and understanding of our language, right? So 2 buckets, multiplication effect that's going on here. But when you unpack these individual constructs, the term simple no longer is an appropriate descriptor, as teaching of the individual components takes significant levels of knowledge and skill. So one thing we had to disperse was we are not trying to create reading teachers out of all of our teachers within the secondary setting. We are trying to create teachers with enough background knowledge in reading and writing and how to teach those things such that they could do the strategies that we were introducing well and understand the basis for those strategies, and then be able to also students who were struggling, who might have been under the radar. So we refer back to the simple view quite often as we go through our training with the teachers. Kim St. Martin put together this graphic to kind of show when ideally skills should be introduced and mastered by students. And you see that top portion is the foundational skills for readers. So by the end of 5th grade, the assumption is, well, they should be able to decode and understand, or not understand, but at least decode all the words that's in front of them. But if you could see this really clearly, you would see a continuation line in terms of continued building of skill in terms of decoding multisyllabic words, content-specific words that often carry much of the meaning and so forth. So even for normally developing students in reading, instruction in how to decode and decipher text still needs to be happening at the secondary level. Like I said, especially for those multisyllabic words and content-specific words. The bottom portion shows that whole comprehension piece, the language comprehension, and that requires that ongoing we are providing background knowledge for students. We are developing their vocabularies and expanding their vocabularies. We're teaching them text structures and on how to decipher or how to gain meaning out of text by understanding those text structures and so on. So those are all things that should be continuing on as we work with our kids at the secondary level in our gen ed settings. In 2008, the Institute for Educational Sciences came out with some literacy recommendations, and we took these to heart. And this has become a seminal guidance document for a lot of the work that's gone on for secondary students. And essentially what it says is, what is the level of evidence of these various practices for making an impact on kids' learning in terms of reading? And you'll see that there are 3 strong, as they call it, recommendations, suggesting that there is lots of evidence to support it. And you will find that the way we structured what we did at North Middle School and the other 3 middle schools that we worked with revolved around this. So number 1, providing explicit vocab instruction. When students are able to decode the words, 50 to 60% of the variance in comprehension is due to vocabulary. And so having explicit instruction, and also not just explicit instruction of certain words that kids need to know, but also creating a culture of vocabulary where you're expanding, because words are not learned in isolation. They are learned in relationship to other words. And so you have to create that culture that is looking for ways to make those connections for students and helping them make the connections themselves. Another one is explicit comprehension strategy instruction. There are a lot of strategies out there that we can talk about. And so it's not about doing all strategies. It's about a package of strategies. And I'll get into that in a little more detail. But we found it very critical to teach teachers a common set of strategies that students could rely on and use. And then the bottom one there, in terms of really intensive and individualized instruction for kids who struggle to read. And what does that look like? Rather than a one size fits all, how do you individualize that at the secondary level, which was tricky, but I think we figured out some of those things. The other two are not any less impactful, but just have a moderate level of support from the research base as to their effectiveness. One is about discussion, social discussion. So really engaging kids in talking about what they've read and making interpretations of that. And then increasing student motivation and engagement. And I'll touch on that a couple times as we go through this. But really, it's not about just providing motivational material. It is about creating situations where kids can be successful, because we truly believe that motivation is a result of being successful rather than just creating high interest in materials or activities for them to engage in. As you'll see, the situation for writing is not all that different, that a lot of the foundational skills occur in elementary, but you see it shifts to the right a little bit. In other words, there's more onus on the secondary level for skills that need to be developed in writing. You may be wondering how students get to the secondary level without the needed skills. You say, how come we're dealing with that? To quote Louisa Moats, who is a giant in the industry of language and literacy, she wrote an article a long time ago that said, teaching reading is rocket science. And now she has a website of that same name. Sadly, as this slide indicates, instructional methods that most teachers learn in their pre-service training are not necessarily in line with the science and evidence of effectiveness. Matter of fact, there was a recent review of college programs indicating that 2/3 of education professors teach these ineffectual methods, and 3/4 of the K-2 teachers use a curriculum based on these precepts. So, and the same philosophical pitfalls of reading apply to writing, where they're trying to develop skills through motivational creative writing exercises and not focusing on foundation. So the good news is that we're starting to see a shift. There's social and financial pressures for people to change. And so we are seeing that shift begrudgingly by some, but more embraced by others. And so after 50 years of fighting the battle and sharing the research in front, I think it's interesting that it's really social and financial pressures that are coming to bear that are really making the change. So good news. For now, however, suffice it to say that you're going to have struggling readers. And quite frankly, even when we get the elementary instruction really resolved, you're still going to have kids that struggle to read at the secondary level. And hopefully not as many, but we found that some kids by this point have learned to disguise their lack of reading skill. And so you need to be doing assessments early on to figure out who's in need. So you need to have a good screener that says, how many kids do we have that are going to have some reading issues that we need to plan for? But then you need to do diagnostic or placement types of assessments that says, what do they need? Because say you develop a group of kids and say, okay, these are all the kids that need reading, and you put them all in the same reading intervention, you're not going to get what you need, because not everyone has the same needs. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in our grid when we get to it. but it's really important. I think one of the schools that I supported and was a coach for had 600 students. They found over 120 of their kids coming in at the 6th grade level were significantly behind in their reading skills. So we had to plan for 120. And Travis, I think we planned for about 60 to 70, if my memory is correct, out of the 600 or so students that you have as well. So a large number of students coming in with needs as we go through. We also, one of the recommendations is to teach compensatory strategies. And I want to be real clear here about what compensatory strategies are. We're not talking about avoidance strategies, which tend to happen at the secondary level. Things such as books on tape, teachers reading to the students, or using videos. Those all have a place, but those will not increase the reading skills of the individuals who need their skills increased. They need to have explicit instruction in how to read, and they need a lot of practice in doing it. So they need to have miles on the page as well. And for a lot of them, that's been a punitive adventure. So again, creating those situations where they can be successful. So I have a little activity for you here, actually one that you can participate with me. I have a niece who had significant struggles in reading years ago. And she had a special ed teacher that was part of the belief that, well, if you just kind of don't worry about decoding the words you don't know, but you use all the context around the words, you'll figure it out and it'll be okay. So I've taken this passage, and what this special ed teacher told my niece to do is, Beth, when you come to a word you don't know, just say the word something and keep going, and you'll figure it out. And so I've replaced all the words in this passage that are 3 syllables or more with the word something. So I'm going to ask that you listen as I read this, and we'll have a little conversation about it at the back end. The something between living things and the something form something. And something is a group of plants and something that depend on each other for something, and the something in which they live. Something can be any size and can occur something. Air, water, and soil support life. A garden pond, a city park, a prairie, and a rainforest are all something of something. Now, here's what the passage actually said. I'll give you a few seconds to read this, and then let's talk a little bit. So if I counted each one of those somethings as an error, I read this passage with 83% accuracy, which, you know, when you get into the secondary, it's like, oh, 80%, that's pretty good. And actually not, huh? How would have my comprehension been on this passage? And I'm thinking, well, based on what I read, I didn't understand any of it. With 83%, the reality is most of your content-specific text includes multisyllabic words that carry much of the meaning of the passages that kids are in. And so they need to be reading at 97, 98% accuracy to really gain full comprehension of the text that's before them. So based on this, which reading domain needs immediate attention? If you think back to the simple view of reading, anybody want to put in the chat, what would be the initial focus for this child? Yeah, thanks, Ann. Nor could I, and I was the one who read it several times. Anybody else want to venture in terms of what, if you had this as a diagnostic assessment of your kid, where are you going to start? Yeah, James, we might start with some vocabulary there. And talking about that. Yeah, Stephanie, decoding is certainly a place where I would go in terms of trying to teach how to break words up into syllables and how to have a strategy for attacking multisyllabic words. Yeah, for sure. So let's talk a little bit more about how we intentionally and systematically built knowledge and skill with our content teachers around before, during, and after reading strategies, and how we developed a two-pronged approach for providing intensive interventions as well. So we called it, PARS was promoting adolescent reading success. That was our moniker. And we called it Two Paths to Excellent. And in the Gen Ed core classes, we provided what we called a host environment that had before, during, and after reading strategies to allow students to access informational text of increasing complexity. So supported ways for that. And then in the intervention settings, we provided an intentional sequence of intensive interventions where at-risk students were appropriately placed and challenged, and with the ultimate goal of generalizing the skills back to the Gen Ed environment. I can't tell you enough how important it is to make sure that the strategies the kids are learning in their intensive intervention settings get used, modeled, and reinforced within their Gen Ed settings. You can have the best interventions in the world, but if they don't get generalized to where the students need to be using them, kids don't tend to automatically go, oh, I see where I can use that. They have to be invited into that process on a regular basis till it becomes normal. So that's what we attempted to do in our process here. We did provide strategies for all teachers that they became very good at. We trained them in these processes. We checked for the fidelity of the implementation of these things, but essentially providing teachers ways in which to support their children in reading all the texts that they had available to them through these various methods. We did avoid some strategies that were really not effective, and some of you may be familiar with those, like round robin reading. How many of us went and they say, okay, you read first paragraph and then you read the next paragraph, and so what you do is focus only, especially those kids that struggle to read, they get real nervous, they focus only on their passage and there's no meaning that's in there. The other thing that we tried to get away from was just calling on hand raisers or calling on students that we knew could read well. We needed to provide situations where kids felt supported and not put on the spot, but also got plenty of practice in reading. And these were the strategies that we used. We also made sure, like I said before, that there were before, during, and after reading strategies. And we really worked on developing a common set of strategies such that as students went from place to place, because and I will suggest that the strategies we chose weren't any better than a set of strategies you might choose. The important thing was choosing a package, something before, something during, something after, to engage students at all levels for all different purposes. But the fact of having common strategies allowed kids to go from class to class and not have to figure out, oh, so what's the strategy I use in this class versus another. There had to be some variation based on text genre and so forth, but for the most part, we tried to maintain that commonality between classrooms. So here and we won't spend a lot of time here, but just some ideas for before reading strategies, both for informational text and narrative. But the ones we really focused on, teaching explicitly vocabulary that was going to be difficult for the students, providing background knowledge and content knowledge in the presentation of those vocabulary terms was important as well. And just building up that background knowledge. During reading, making sure kids were engaged. Sometimes at the secondary level, reading gets assigned. Okay, I want you to read chapter 4 and then answer the questions at the end or whatever. And students really, a lot of students don't read. They go right to the questions and then just try to find the answers, or they read it as though they're reading a novel, and they start at word 1 and end at word 1,000 or whatever it might be, and hope that whatever they needed to get out of it stuck somewhere. And really, when you're working with informational text, you need to have much better strategy than that. So, and then after reading, there's a number of activities to be chosen. And here's just some other culminating activities. So you can go back and look at these slides and kind of decide what your package needs to be or where you want to start. Even though we show this as a package, though, you need to know that when we train the teachers, we took time to first teach explicit vocabulary skills to the teachers and make sure they've got good at those, and we had fidelity checks on those. Then we moved on to a during reading passage type activities and got good at that. So we didn't introduce them all at once in terms of training, but they need to be used together for the benefit of the students. And here's just some challenges that kids tend to come in knowing how to deal with narrative text a whole lot better than they do informational text, bottom line. And we need to be very intentional about teaching them how to get through informational text. So I thought that second bullet was worth highlighting. Any student at certain points in time is at risk of comprehension issues. And so they will benefit from these strategies that we're dealing with. As Travis said, even our high achievers benefited from the things we did. So here's what we used: explicit vocab, passage reading procedures, and text summarization. And then after a while, we layered in SQ3R. Some of especially our social studies teachers, really glommed onto that one and found that extremely beneficial. So I'd like you, I'm going to try the magic of stopping my screen share and sharing a couple quick video clips of one of Travis's team members, Kate Smith. And what I'd like you to listen for is what are the things that she felt were important about the common strategy aspect of what we're doing and the push for a whole school emphasis on this. So, all right, so now I need to figure out where did it go? Sorry, folks. You're looking at remedial screen sharing.
Really collaboratively work with the teachers that I co-teach with. And one of the English teachers is also a reading intervention teacher, and so we talk all the time about what's working, what's not. When I'm co-teaching in her room, I might be up at the board, and because those routines are in place, it doesn't matter if she's leading or I'm leading. We're still correlate reading or filling in my blank, or okay, turn to your partner. And all of those pieces are just really fluid because that's the norm in the building. And the culture has really been established by our administration that this is the expectation. It's not someone that's fleeting. It's not going to pass. This works. Research shows it works. It engages kids. And again, it's just the norm. It's what we do.
All right. I'm not seeing where to go to get out of here. Fantab. All right, I need a little help here, folks. How to stop sharing here. Sorry about this. Yeah. I'm not seeing. I have my friend Matt Hogue. Say hi to Matt.
Well, John, just some of the, while you're figuring that out, just some of the comments that I'm seeing in the chat box around Kate's video culture and implementation and support were very critical to what we were able to do. And I would say that support initially started at our admin level, our central office team. So from a financial perspective, from a professional learning perspective, they provided us with the time and the resources to do those things. But also, like Kay said, it was an expectation, right? So we jumped into this because we felt confident that it was based on research. Like I said, it wasn't one of those flavor of the month type things. And it's something that we still are doing today, even through COVID, and I'll talk about that a little bit later too, but even through COVID and virtual learning, we were implementing aspects of our Tier 1 program while still being able to deliver effective Tier 2 reading intervention. So in a time where we probably could have scrapped it and said, we're just gonna focus on X, Y, or Z, we continued doing the things that we knew worked, even when kids weren't sitting in front of us. So.
Yeah, cool. Well, here we go.
Fully utilize some of the same strategies you're using in intervention versus those classrooms that maybe aren't yet using maybe active participation strategies.
Yeah, our teachers in our building have had years of training and being immersed in the expectation that they're using the active participation strategies, and the ones that do it makes my job easy, but more importantly, the kids are really able to engage in those classrooms. They feel comfortable participating because they know the strategy that's being used, and they now just have to apply or read or use whatever new information is there because those strategies are already in place. And I see confidence, and I see them being able to really generalize what they've learned in the intervention class and see it in a bigger, broader picture in the Gen Ed class. And it really is beautiful to see them feel comfortable in that setting.
And though we have those full audio or full videos of those interviews, both with Travis and with Kate, in the links that are in this presentation. So please feel free to use them, to access them. And yeah, they're nice, really nice to share as you go through. So, all right. Get back to the PowerPoint, and I think that we will be super. That's the last transition. Yay. So the last thing I just want to talk on quickly, because I want to get to Travis and give him some time. The intervention grid that we used. Like I said, you can't just place everybody in the same intervention. So you have to address all these different skills, and some kids came in needing a few of these, some came in needing several, and some came in needing all. We were surprised. This was our grid that we used. We started out proposing that we put kids who needed decoding of multisyllabic words in rewards secondary and move forward from there into more comprehension type stuff. But we found that we had a number of kids functioning at the first, second, and third grade levels that needed basic phonics. And so we added in phonics for reading or SRA decoding, depending on the kid's prior experience. We tried not to repeat any type of intervention because that's kind of the kiss of death. I failed at it before, so why should I need to do it again? So a couple key factors in that. One is making sure that the programs were being done with high fidelity, but we even found that high fidelity in implementation did not result in improvement of some kids' skills. And we had to go to what's called intensification. And in that case, we really analyzed ongoing weekly data points in order to intensify for the skills that the kids were meeting. And we started to really see a shift after that point. Also, they had to be multi-year. It was interesting. Sixth graders seemed to be the most resistant once they had experienced though their intervention realm, by 7th and 8th grade, they were saying, I don't want to be out of intervention. I want to stand here. I'm being successful. I see myself getting better. We saw a real change in attitude. So here's just a couple questions for your own thought, and then I'm going to just pop it over to Travis here. What does intervention look like at the secondary level for you guys? Is it a repeat of what kids got earlier? Is it a one size fits all and so forth? It really has to be thought and mapped out onto the needs of the students that you've got coming in. So Travis, I'm going to bring it back to you and let you take us through the findings.
All right, I need to try something though. My PowerPoint is saying unable to stream in a reasonable amount of time. So I'm going to pop out and pop back in and see if that fixes it. So give me 2 seconds.
Okay.
All right, John, I see you, but I don't see the PowerPoint anymore.
Okay, I'm going to stop screen share and refresh here. Here we go again. Yeah. You see where it is? I'm not finding my cursor. Ah, there we go. Do you see it now?
Yeah, we're back in business.
Okay.
All right, here comes the fun part. We're going to talk about what we learned along this journey. How we're planning to continue the work and what we're going to do moving forward. So this first slide, like John discussed, these are the content area reading strategies that we are utilizing in this model. And the next few slides, we're going to look at capacity for our staff, training, sustainability. Keep in mind that this data is a few years old. And that's one of the things that we are focusing on as we return to somewhat normal instruction in the fall, really refocusing our efforts on what those tier 1 strategies are in our gen ed classrooms. And really, we're going to have to go back through the entire training process, probably with everyone, just so folks know that it's something that we're not forgetting about. So in the training process that we did it cohort by cohort. And that was one of the questions that I saw earlier in the chat was what that planning timeline was, who was trained. So we started with a group of, I don't know, John, what were there, 5 or 6 teachers in that cohort. And they were chosen intentionally because they, like on everyone's staff, you have the go-getters, you have the people who are going to jump in, who are your building leaders, whether they're formal or informal. They're the ones that have the impact and the sway in the building. So getting them on board early was important, and getting them trained and using those strategies really paid off in the end, because folks were looking at them kind of for the green light on, all right, are we doing this? And once they started to see how effective those things were in their classrooms, it really got everyone else on board and excited to get trained.
Hey, Travis, there's a real quick question. What was your free and reduced lunch percentage?
We're 45-50%. Pretty consistently.
Okay. Emily, it's a great question. We'll come to that at the end.
So a lot of our data collection was self-reporting done by teachers and by our students. So one of the things that I thought was effective is that we had a working agreement with our staff when we entered into this process, in that it wasn't going to be evaluative. It wasn't going to be part of their yearly evaluations. It really was intentional coaching, primarily from John. And we were intentional about that because we wanted our staff to feel comfortable trying these things without myself or without our assistant principal in the classrooms evaluating them in any way. Not that we would, but we didn't want that perception from them. So having someone like John or an outside coach, a literacy coach, or someone to come in and do the coaching, do the feedback, do the fidelity checks really helped us move the ball quicker. We would have gotten there, but I think this really expedited the process. And one of the important things on these self-reporting surveys that were done by the teachers and by the students is that rarely, so you have often, sometimes, rarely, hardly ever do you see a student or a teacher responding with rarely. And we know that these can be inflated percentages, but when you look at what the kids don't, they have no reason to inflate their numbers. So when you take the kids' responses and the teachers' responses, they line up really well. So we feel pretty confident that what they're reporting is accurate. So this is a slide that we use for our teachers to measure what they feel like the impact or the benefit of the strategy use is. So just looking at some of the things, did it improve student engagement? Yes. No one disagreed with that. Half of our folks strongly agreed with it. Do they feel like it benefited them? Right? So 100% of our teachers felt strongly or agreed that the strategies that we were providing them were benefiting them as an instructor. Student motivation, I think, was the one area where folks were a little on the fence about whether or not it motivated students. But when you talk to the kids who are benefiting the most from this, they know that it's working for them. And then the one piece of data that means the most to me is that they are likely to continue using these strategies, and 80% of our folks feel strongly that they're going to continue using them. So that just says that they're seeing the benefit of what's working. All right, so just a quick activity. You can drop a few comments in the chat box if you want. Middle school, high school folks, are there school-wide instructional strategies that are being used? And it doesn't have to be around reading. It could be an instructional approach that your kids go from classroom to classroom and they see some common methods of instructing. So is that happening in anyone's buildings right now?
While you guys are doing that, Emily asked a question about how did we know to intensify? What did we do in terms of the intensification of the intervention strategies? We had both in-program mastery tests going on very frequently, as well as external CBM measures being taken. And we looked at those as an intervention team monthly. And we said, what's working? We didn't look individually at kids. We looked at groups of students in terms of fidelity of implementation. And if fidelity was there and some kids were not moving, then we started to go to, all right, so what skills specifically are they missing? How do I circle back and re-intensify the instruction, provide more practice for them? We had to get away from, I need to complete this program, to, I need kids to master this program. If it's going to take a little longer, it's going to take a little longer, but we're going to master this. We're not going to get the end and say, oh, I guess they didn't get it. We do it again. That was a strong learning in the first year for us.
Yeah. All right, John. So just some of the comments from the chat box, not having common instructional strategies in your secondary schools. is not surprising. But I will say that once you have those practices in place, the kids' level of confidence going from classroom to classroom skyrockets because they know what the expectation is. And even outside of instructional strategy, just having common behavioral expectations in how your classroom or how things operate has yielded results that are incredible. All right, John, we can move on. So this gets a little more into the intervention side of things and just how we were able to scale and how we were able to train staff. We have, at the time of this, we had 5 teachers running intervention programs ranging from phonics to rewards, read to achieve, that whole series of intervention programs. All of them had been trained in all of the programs that they were teaching. And John would go in and do fidelity checks to ensure that the program was being delivered with fidelity. And those numbers consistently came back that they were doing their job. So fidelity is often one of those things that is forgotten about when you're looking at how effective interventions are. If they're not delivering the program the way it was intended to be delivered, your results are going to be all over the board. So ensuring that those programs are delivered in a way that they were meant to be has been very impactful for our kids. Takes the guesswork out of it. Intervention access was one of the things that I think a lot of middle school and high schools are going to struggle with, making sure that you have enough staffing and enough sections to meet the needs of all your kids. And when I first came to North Middle School, we had a couple of parapros running one intervention program, and it was, all right, so we have 20 spots, the 20 lowest kids get into that intervention, right? So it wasn't the right intervention for the kids. It was kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. And that was one of the things that we needed to get creative with and how we staffed our intervention program. We have anywhere from 65 to 75 kids a year accessing our intervention programs, and staffing that can get tricky sometimes. So it's a combination of using some of our general ed FTE, some of our special ed FTE. We don't have any title money at the middle school level, but we have some 31A at-risk money. So leveraging all of those different pots of money to meet the needs of our kids was important. And we have support from the administration building to do those things and get creative with how we're using those funds. So these are just some data when you're looking at the effectiveness of our programs. So MAISE is a curriculum-based measurement that measures reading comprehension. Students, for this, if you're not familiar with it, students read passages silently, and they have to make selections every so often as to what word makes sense in the passage. It's really gauging comprehension. So what you're looking at are just some benchmarking or some MAISE scores from our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students. In this data, like I said, it's important, but it's not why we do it, right? So some of the other data that you're going to see here, and I think it's on the next slide, John, actually. Now this is NWEA. We use that 3 times a year, primarily as our universal screener. So Laurel asked, how do you identify students who need intervention? NWEA is one piece to that. We don't just use one measure. So it's a combination of their DIBEL scores from the elementary school, other curriculum-based measurements that we are using here at our building. But John, if you want to go to the next slide, this is the one that to me has been the most impressive, or the one that I have seen the most gains in. Historically, our students with IEPs, before this, I don't remember one of our students with IEPs having a proficient score on MSTEP. And we jumped up to 17%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're at 0 and go to 17 and the state average is 11, you got to feel pretty good about that. Also looking at our economically disadvantaged students, we were at 41% proficient when compared to the state average at 27. And then our evidence-based reading and writing scores on PSAT 8, we jumped up 10% in 1 year. And I attribute that, so that group of 8th graders was our first group to go through 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade with these tier 1 instructional strategies and intervention program access. So, it's one of those things that it doesn't look like a huge number, but when you're looking at your historical data, it means a lot to us. And these are some of the things that you got to show your staff. When you start making these incremental gains, the things that we're doing are working. All right, just a quick question, and we're kind of running out of time, John, so I think we'll skip this activity.
All right, sounds good.
All right, so here's where you learned what worked and what didn't work for us. So we're going to look at this from 3 different levels. So we're going to look at it from the systems and leadership level. We're going to look at it from the gen ed level, and then we're going to look at it from intervention. So, John, the next couple of slides, we can just I'm just going to hit some of the highlights. So just feel free to move on whenever you feel like we're in a good spot.
Okay.
From the systems perspective, and I look at our systems perspective being like our leadership team, right? So myself, our school psychologist, our MTSS coordinator, our intervention folks. So that team I look at as our system team or our leadership team. And if you are not using the reading tiered fidelity inventory, and John, that document's accessible on the MTSS website, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is a comprehensive look at how your system is addressing the needs of your students, right? So it gets into things like intervention access, things like training, sustainability, who's on your leadership team? Do you have a representation from a varied group of people? So that for us was the jumping off point. So we went through and we looked at where we were on that inventory and what we needed to, so what are the things that we need to address now? And what are some of the things that we can address over time? And from that, we created an action plan of how we were going to go about doing things. So through that process, we started creating documents. We always looked at it from the approach of, well, what if none of us are here next year? What's going to happen to this program if I leave or if our school psychologist leaves? So we started being intentional about creating those documents and housing them where we needed to, so anyone could pick up the ball and run with it. This one's kind of a no-brainer, but maintaining your team over a period of time, that has been, it's been great. This year we'll be in a little bit of a different situation because we have 2 critical members of our team moving on to do different things. But having them together for the last 5 years has allowed us to get to a point where I feel okay about them going. And we're still going to be able to continue the good work that we're doing. So from a general education perspective, anecdotally, student engagement is up. You can walk around, kids feel more confident in the classrooms, especially those students who are receiving intervention, who are typically the kids who aren't raising their hands, who aren't wanting to participate because they don't feel confident in what they're doing and how they're interacting with their peers. That has changed significantly. And that's been really fun to watch. I think in Kate's video, Kate is one of our special ed teachers, and she goes into some of our gen ed ELA classes to help some of her students with IEPs or other struggling students. And that's one of the things that she has picked up on was her kids are they're engaging, they're doing the things that they historically have not been doing. You know, teachers are using the strategies. You know, teachers are reporting that. I'm seeing it as I walk around and doing observations or just pop-ins. And they're using it. You know, there's an example on here. We had our 7th grade students went to the Holocaust Memorial Center in Detroit, and they were intending on reading a novel prior to going, but because of the availability, they had to go prior to reading the novel. So our teachers took this as an opportunity to explicitly teach some of those vocab words that they were going to need for that trip to make sense, right? So they could comprehend the information that the docent was giving them. And our teachers came back and they said that they're glad they spent the time doing that, because if they hadn't, it would have went way over the kid's head. And then from an intervention perspective, our teams are meeting monthly. They're looking at progress monitoring data. John has even gotten them to a point where they are, they're recording clips of them teaching, and then they're bringing that clip to this team, and they're looking for feedback. They want to get better at what they're doing and how they're doing it. And that is done without me. So I'm not in that process with them. They know I'm here for support. They know John is there for some support and coaching, but really it's them, you know, looking at instruction and being reflective on what they did and how they did it. And like I said, our kids who are typically disengaged, they're all in right now. So that's great. All right, some lessons learned. So I would say we didn't really hit our stride probably until mid-year 3, maybe year 4. So it took a couple of years for us to get to a point where our staff felt confident in what they were doing. Our kids felt confident in what they were doing. So it's one of those, it takes time. And you know, you're going to have some folks in your building who are going to want to see immediate results, and it doesn't happen overnight. It takes a while. So some of our lessons learned from a systems perspective, it was really defining our roles and what our jobs and responsibilities were within that team. You know, there was a lot of overlap between what our MTSS coordinator was doing, which is a part-time position in our building, and what our school psychologist was doing. So really hammering out who does what was very important, because it made our time as a team more efficient when one person was delivering the information and not 2 or 3. Creating time and space for meetings to occur. If you're a building leader, before school, after school meetings typically aren't as productive as if you can carve out some time during the day. So at least once a quarter, what we have done traditionally is we'll get half-day subs, and we meet as a team for a solid 3 or 4 hour block of time. I buy them lunch. It's little things like that that makes that time more valuable, because they don't feel like they're running to an appointment after school or they're picking their kids up. Just it's focused and it's intentional. From a systems perspective, also, we learned hiring practices are important. We trained multiple people, got them in front of kids, and realized that wasn't the right spot for them. And making that tough decision and having the conversation with those individuals, it's not easy. But you have to make those decisions on what's the right fit for your kids and what's the right fit for your teachers. So from a gen ed perspective, let's see. So one of the things, like I said earlier, one of the things that we are going to need to do coming off of COVID is we need to spend some time being intentional about what and how our teachers need, right? So jumping, throwing another initiative or another whatever at them right now is not going to be the right thing to do. So we're going to spend this next year refocusing on what we've been doing and getting better at it, and making sure our kids have what they need. And John talked about the intensification process. That's one of the things that we learned along the way. When kids aren't meeting their progress monitoring or their benchmarking goals, really digging into why is that, right? So is it, are they misplaced, which happens? We have put kids in the wrong intervention based on data that we thought was right, and they got into it and it was either way over their head or it was way too easy. So being okay with moving kids interventions has to be something that you're okay with. So some of the changes that we made from a systems perspective, so one of the things that we are trying to do or are doing in Portage is we're scaling what we are doing at my middle school to the other 2 middle schools in Portage, and having someone outside of your building leadership team, your principal, your assistant principal, whoever, having someone help coordinate that has been incredibly helpful at making this something we can replicate across our buildings. Some of the other changes that we've made from an intervention perspective, running your intervention programs with paras, we have found wasn't effective, largely because of the turnover in that area. So we made a decision to move to our certified teachers delivering that instruction. So it's a combination of our ELA teachers and our special ed folks delivering that content.
Hey, Travis, you mentioned that you have the other middle schools now going similar installation, but one of the questions that came up in the chat box was, what about 9 through 12? Are they continuing it on?
So yes, this upcoming year will be the first year that at least Northern High School, which our kids feed into, they are continuing the work that we are doing. So that will be impactful for those kids. They're not in the same spot instructionally. So, as far as like common tier 1 practices at the high school level, they're not where we are. And I don't know that they will get there, but we'll see.
Another question was, with the intervention teams, who on those teams review the data? That was kind of everybody, in terms of running those intervention teams. They own their own data, but it was made public to everyone. So when we came together, we looked at data not from a standpoint of, evaluation. It was more, wow, who needs help with what? What do you need? And you just had to build that trust in that process. But everyone was looking at that data on everyone's data on an ongoing basis. But what was really cool, I was walking behind 2 of the intervention teachers one day, and one of them turned to the other and says, you have your kids really doing well on this skill, and my kids are struggling. What are you doing that's making that difference? She says, you want to come in? She says, I sure do. I mean, those types of relationships and expectations got fostered to just put goosebumps on my neck, right? So.
And John, a lot of this
we are at time, unfortunately. What were you going to say, Travis? I'll let you finish up.
I was just going to say, so some of the comments and questions in the chat box have been around things like entry exit criteria, and our contact information is at the end of this. So if there are documents or flow charts, just kind of team roles and responsibilities, we have that. So feel free to email me and I can share that out with you.
Great. Well, another couple of slides you have is going through COVID. I'm going to go to our exit sketch code so that people have that. But like Travis said, please send direct questions to us. We'll be glad to respond. But Travis, do you want to say anything about the COVID piece while I do that?
Yeah, and I addressed it a little bit, but just that our teachers, even when we were in virtual pandemic learning, we're still doing the work. They were still delivering explicit vocab slides. They were using active engagement strategies, even online, and our intervention programs were still running. Delivering intensive reading instruction virtually, we didn't think was gonna work, but our teachers made it work and our kids responded. So we're definitely going to have a lot of work to do here in a few weeks when kids get back into the building, but I feel like we're in a good spot to continue the work.
Cool. Well, thank you everyone for your investments in this. Again, if you are getting sketches, please jot down the code. I'll keep it up here for a few minutes. I know we need to move on to our break, but thank you, Travis, for your sharing of all the things that worked, didn't work, and lessons learned. Just to watch the chat box light up a little bit on that one suggests you were hitting right on the mark. So thank you.